The capture. The war between the Zorath Dominion and the Terran Union had already raged across a dozen worlds when a small human patrol ship was intercepted near the border. The Zorath had been waiting for such an opportunity for years, for though they had faced human fleets in space and seen their ferocity in battle, they had never captured a living soldier alive. When the patrol craft was disabled and boarded, they took its pilot, a single human, named Daniel Creed, as their prize. He was dragged, in chains, to the dark hold of their warship, surrounded by towering insectoid guards with razor claws and cold, glowing eyes. To the Zorath, this was a day of triumph, to have at last a specimen of the most feared species in the galaxy. Daniel, however, did not look like a prisoner broken and afraid. Instead, he looked around with the calmness of someone walking into a bar. He studied the strange walls made of living metal that pulsed faintly and tilted his head as if he found it fascinating rather than terrifying. When they shoved him into the interrogation chamber, he laughed a short, rough laugh that made the guards exchange uneasy glances. They were used to screams, not laughter. The chains clinked against the chair as they strapped him down, and he spoke casually as if he were meeting old friends. "Nice place you have here," he said with a grin. "Could use a little paint, maybe a window or two." The Zorath commander overseeing the capture was called Venar. His long antennae twitched with irritation at the human's tone. In his mind, this creature should have been trembling already, begging for mercy. Humans were supposed to be emotional, fragile, easily broken. The Dominion's scientists had assured the Council that this experiment would prove humanity's weakness and deliver a propaganda victory. Yet as Venar looked into Daniel's steady brown eyes, he saw no fear, only curiosity, and something else. A spark of mischief that unsettled him. Daniel sat comfortably as the first instruments were wheeled into the room. Strange alien machines with glowing blades and humming coils designed to inflict agony beyond imagination. The guards prepared their devices, clicking mandibles in anticipation, while the commander declared in a booming voice, "You are a prisoner of the Zorath Dominion. You will reveal your codes, your fleet positions, your defenses, or you will suffer pain that no species can endure." Daniel tilted his head, smiled again, and replied with a tone of mock seriousness, "Well, that sounds fun. Do I get a prize if I make it to the end?" The guards looked confused. They did not understand humor. They thought perhaps it was a bluff, a defense mechanism that would soon collapse. But inside the human's mind, Daniel felt no fear. He had grown up on Earth in a place where pain was no stranger. He had trained as a soldier, fought battles that left scars, and he had endured worse than what these aliens thought they could deliver. To him, the restraints felt like cheap handcuffs, and the cold air smelled more like a damp locker room than a dungeon. He treated the moment as if it were a game, a contest between himself and these strange creatures. When they activated the first machine, sending sharp currents of energy through his body, he jerked, but not in pain. He let out a laugh, a genuine laugh that echoed across the chamber. His voice rang out like someone enjoying a rough sport match. He said, "Is that all you have? I thought you bugs were supposed to be scary." The commander's mandibles clicked in anger, while the guards exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen many species crushed within seconds under this device. Yet here was a human chuckling, as though tickled. The whispers began among the guards. Perhaps the stories of humans were true. Perhaps they were not weak at all, but creatures beyond comprehension. Daniel leaned back against the chair, his face flushed, but his grin unbroken. He looked around the room slowly, meeting the eyes of each alien as if challenging them to try harder. His steady calm in the heart of the Dominion's dreaded chamber was the first crack in their confidence, and as the door sealed shut behind them, Daniel Creed whispered softly to himself, "Let's see how long it takes before they realize they are the ones trapped with me. First torture session." The chamber darkened as the Zorath scientists entered, their tall insect-like bodies moving with cold precision. Their claws tapped against the glowing consoles as they prepared. The next stage of the interrogation, Commander Venar stood at the side, his antennae twitching with a mixture of impatience and curiosity. For centuries, the Dominion had perfected methods of breaking captives. They had charts showing which species, cracked within minutes, which within hours, and which within days no record existed of anyone resisting longer than a few days. Their science assured them that pain was a universal language, and that every being could be forced into obedience, but as they looked at Daniel Creed strapped in his chair still smiling, they felt the first stirrings of doubt. Daniel tilted his head as a new machine descended from the ceiling. A sphere covered with sharp spines and glowing veins of light. It hovered, just above his chest, humming with a sinister tone. The guards expected him to whimper or close his eyes. Instead, Daniel raised his eyebrows and muttered, "This looks like one of those carnival rides back on Earth. Is it supposed to shake or just make noise?" His casual words were translated into harsh syllables by the machine, and for the first time some of the younger guards hesitated. Their commanders had promised them victory, but the human spoke as though he were a spectator rather than a victim. The machine activated and the spines extended, piercing his skin with electric shocks designed to send agony directly into the nervous system. His body arched as the current coursed through him, muscles straining against the restraints. The guards leaned forward, expecting the cries of pain that always came. Instead, Daniel laughed. His laughter echoed through the room, rough and unbroken, as if he were enjoying himself. He gasped between chuckles and said, "Seriously, that is the best you. Have I once had a bunk bed collapse on me during training hurt a lot more than this?" The scientists exchanged confused looks. Their instruments told them the pain was excruciating, yet the subject not only endured it, but mocked it. Commander Vaynar stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This is not a game, human. Tell us your codes, your fleet's strength." Daniel's eyes gleamed with amusement, and he replied, "If you wanted to play 20 questions, you should have just asked nicely. Maybe start with, 'My favorite color,'" the commander hissed in frustration. His authority depended on breaking this prisoner quickly and publicly. If word spread that the human resisted their best methods, the Dominion's reputation for terror would suffer. The scientists tried another device. This one projected waves of heat directly into the flesh-cooking skin without leaving scars. The chamber filled with the smell of burning, and yet Daniel clenched his teeth, smiled through the haze, and muttered, "Reminds me of summer back home when we used to have barbecues. You aliens ever try ribs?" The guards recoiled not from the heat but from the words. This human spoke as if the torment connected to fond memories. He was not supposed to be like this. Hours passed as one device after another was used, and still Daniel endured. He sweated, he shook his body. Bore marks of their efforts, but he never screamed. He mocked them, compared the pain to childhood games, to silly accidents, to training drills. Each laugh, each joke was like a blade cutting through the Dominion's pride. The guards began whispering among themselves. One said quietly, "Perhaps the humans are beyond pain." Another replied, "No, he must be insane." Yet even insanity should have broken by now. Vaynar watched with growing anger and fear. His plan was collapsing before his eyes. Instead of showing the galaxy that humans were weak, he was showing them something else, something dangerous. Daniel looked at him across the chamber through the haze of smoke and pain and grinned. "You really should let me go, Commander, because the longer I sit here, the more your people will realize I am not the one in trouble, you are." The commander did not answer, but his claws dug into the console as his authority slipped further. When the session ended and the machines powered down, Daniel sat slumped but still awake, still smiling. His chest rose and fell, but his eyes never closed. The guards escorted him back to the cell in silence. For the first time in their long history of breaking prisoners, they had no victory to report. In the corridors of the warship, whispers began to spread that the human had not only survived, but laughed through the torture rumors carried faster than orders, and soon the entire crew began to wonder what kind of creature could turn agony into a game. As Daniel sat in his dark cell, he leaned against the wall, humming softly to himself. He thought of Earth, of his comrades, of battles yet to come. He felt no despair, only determination. For every laugh he gave them was a message to himself. He was alive, he was unbroken, and he would make sure they never forgot it. Escalation. The Dominion ship carried an air of unease as Daniel Creed sat in his cell, smiling to himself while the guards whispered in the corridors. The first session had not gone the way the commanders expected. Instead of a broken husk, they had returned with a prisoner who had laughed in the face of pain and mocked the devices that had brought entire species to their knees. Commander Vaynar could not allow this to continue. His authority depended on breaking the human, so he summoned the most feared torturers of the Dominion, creatures trained for decades in methods of cruelty. They were brought aboard with promises that they would achieve what the first team could not. The chamber was prepared again this time with far more sinister instruments. Hooks suspended from the yaw, sealing coils of fire that could peel flesh without killing the victim, and a mental probe that could force open thoughts and memories. Daniel was dragged in chained as before and placed on the chair. His body bore scars from the last session, but his grin was still there. The torturers expected fear or at least silence. Instead, Daniel looked around at the new equipment and laughed softly. "You all went shopping for me. How thoughtful. I feel special already." The words unsettled even the most hardened guards. The first torment came with fire. The coils wrapped around his arms, glowing red as they burned through skin. The smell filled the air, and the guards watched for a scream. But Daniel only winced, then chuckled as he muttered under his breath, "Reminds me of when I grabbed a hot pan in the mess hall back home, could not use my hand for a week." The guard stared in disbelief, because to him, even this seemed like nothing more than a memory of some clumsy kitchen accident. Next came the blades, long and curved, laced with venom that should have sent waves of agony through his body. They sliced shallow lines across his chest, leaving dark trails of poison. Daniel hissed at the sting, then looked directly into the eyes of the nearest torturer and said, "You are not very good at this back home. We called this a game of truth, or dare. I guess you picked dare." The alien froze because for a moment it seemed the human was mocking not only the pain, but the very purpose of their existence. They were supposed to inspire fear and obedience, yet here was one who turned it into a joke. Finally, they brought out the mental probe, a device said to strip the mind bare, forcing confessions and memories to the surface. The spines of the machine pressed against his skull, and a wave of pressure filled his head. The torturers leaned forward, expecting the screams of madness that always followed. But Daniel only gritted his teeth and then laughed again, shaking his head as if at some private joke. He muttered, "This is just like trying to stay awake during training lectures. You can dig around all you like, but you will only find boredom and a lot of bad jokes." His laughter echoed again through the chamber, while the mental probe failed to break him. Hours dragged by, and the torturers grew desperate. The human endured everything they threw at him, and every time he twisted it into something familiar, something small, something that made them feel like children fumbling at a giant. The guards whispered among themselves that perhaps humans were not normal creatures at all. Perhaps they were predators who enjoyed the suffering meant for them. Commander Vaynar watched with mounting dread. His carefully laid plans were collapsing, with every laugh and every mocking word. By the time Daniel was returned to his cell, he was bloodied, burned, and exhausted, yet he was still smiling. He leaned back against the wall, humming a tune from his childhood, and when the guards closed the door, he whispered loud enough for them to hear, "That was fun. Let me know when the real challenge begins." The words spread like fire across the warship. The story of the human who laughed at torment became a rumor that refused to die. Some said he was unkillable. Some said he fed on pain. Others whispered that he was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate humanity had turned into the beginning of fear within the Dominion. Because if one man could endure so much and treat it as nothing more than a game, what would an army of humans do? And in the silence of his cell, Daniel smiled. Not because he enjoyed the suffering, but because he knew every laugh was a weapon more powerful than any blade. He had turned their greatest tool of control into his own battlefield, and on that battlefield he was winning psychological warfare. The warship had begun to change ever since Daniel Creed's arrival. The crew who once carried themselves with cold confidence now moved with unease in the corridors. They whispered of the human who laughed in the torture chamber, who compared searing pain to childhood games and treated venom like a dare. The Dominion had always ruled through fear, but now it was their own people who were beginning to fear a single prisoner had bent the balance of their certainty, and Commander Vaynar knew it. The more Daniel resisted, the more his legend grew, and the more dangerous his presence became. Daniel himself seemed to sense this shift. He no longer acted like a prisoner. Instead, he carried himself like a guest waiting for the right time to leave. When guards brought him food, he joked about their cooking. When they escorted him down the halls, he asked them about their families in a tone so casual that it unsettled them. Some refused to even meet his eyes for fear that his smile carried something they could not understand. He was playing a game of his own, a game of turning their minds against themselves. The next session was not ordered to test his body but to break his spirit. The torturers brought him into the chamber and set aside their machines. Instead, they surrounded him with holograms crafted to attack the mind, showing visions of his home destroyed, his comrades slaughtered, his family begging for mercy. The Dominion had used these illusions countless times to shatter the will of entire species. They expected tears, despair, confessions. Instead, Daniel leaned back against the chair and shook his head slowly as if he were watching a poorly acted play. He even clapped once sarcastically before saying, "You should hire better writers. These effects are worse than training simulations." The scientists hissed in frustration, because the illusions that once crushed whole armies now seemed like childlike tricks in front of him. They tried another method, surrounding him with whispers in his own language designed to imitate his friends, calling him a failure, begging him to give up. Daniel listened for a moment, then started laughing harder than before. He said, "That does not even sound like them. If you want to copy my squad, at least get the swearing right." The guards shifted uncomfortably. The man did not only resist the illusions, he mocked them, turned them into comedy routines. He was breaking their confidence without lifting a finger. Days passed with no progress, and Daniel's influence grew stronger. Guards spoke of nightmares where they saw his smile. Others avoided the torture chamber altogether, claiming the humans' laughter followed them even in their dreams. The Dominion's greatest weapon had always been psychological warfare, but now Daniel had turned it against them. He spoke casually during his sessions, reminding them that their empire was built on fear and that fear had no power over him. He asked them questions instead of answering theirs. Questions like, "What do you think your rulers would do to you if they saw you fail here? What happens when your people realize their weapons do not work?" And slowly those questions began to fester in their minds. Commander Vaynar felt the grip of authority slipping. Each time he entered the chamber, he found himself avoiding the humans' steady gaze. For in those eyes he no longer saw a victim but a predator waiting patiently. Vaynar ordered the guards to increase surveillance, yet even that failed. Daniel would hum tunes from his childhood at night, and soon guards began humming them too without realizing. He was inside their thoughts, twisting their discipline into confusion. One evening during a late session, Daniel leaned forward against his restraints and spoke in a low voice that carried through the room. "You think you are in control because I am chained to this chair. But let me tell you a secret. You are the ones who are chained. Chained to fear. Chained to the idea that your pain machines make you strong. But I am showing you the truth. You need me to scream because, without fear, your empire has nothing." The guards froze because his words struck deeper than any blade. The Dominion was built on terror, and here was a human tearing that foundation apart, with nothing but laughter and calm defiance. By the time Daniel was dragged back to his cell, the guards looked shaken. One of them whispered, "He is not a prisoner. He is the warden." The words echoed through the crew, and the rumor took on a life of its own, for some began to believe that the human was not resisting the Dominion but slowly conquering it from within. And in his dark cell, Daniel Creed smiled, knowing the real battle had only just begun, the slip of control. The Dominion had expected the human to collapse after days of torment, yet Daniel Creed remained, unbroken and more dangerous than before. The crew whispered that his laughter echoed through the corridors even when he was silent, and some guards refused duty near his cell, claiming they felt his eyes watching them even through the steel walls. Commander Vaynar knew his authority was slipping, So he ordered one last demonstration of control. The human would be subjected to a display of pain so extreme that even his stubborn will would collapse and the Dominion would reclaim its pride. The UE chamber was prepared with every device known to the torturers: fire and ice venom and shock illusion and mental probe, all combined into one endless session. Daniel was strapped once again to the chair, his body scarred, yet his smile still present. He looked around at the elaborate machinery and said in a calm voice, "You really went all out for me this time. Almost feels like I am being welcomed to a festival." The guards hissed, but none dared respond. The session began, and every device unleashed its cruelty at once. The heat seared his flesh, the venom burned through his veins, the shocks rattled his muscles, and the mental probe pushed at his mind. Daniel shook and strained, yet through clenched teeth he laughed and whispered louder than the machines. "Is this all you have? I thought you wanted to break me." Hours passed until the torturers themselves faltered with exhaustion. They deactivated the machines one by one and prepared to unstrap him. But it was then that something changed. Daniel moved not with a sudden burst of violence, but with slow, deliberate strength. He shifted his wrists, and the metal restraints bent slightly, then snapped as though they were no more than brittle wire. The guards froze in terror as he rose from the chair, his body battered but his stance firm. The commander shouted orders, but no one moved because they could not comprehend how their unbreakable restraints had failed. Daniel stood calmly stretching, his arms as though he had simply finished a workout. He looked at the guards with that same mischievous grin and said, "I could have done that earlier, but I wanted to see how long it would take for you to realize none of this works." He did not attack. He did not run. He simply sat back down in the chair and placed his hands on the armrests as if daring them to try again. The silence in the room was heavier than any weapon. The guards trembled because they understood the meaning. He had been free all along and had chosen to remain only to prove a point. The rumor spread across the ship faster than any official message. The human had broken free, yet refused to escape. He was no prisoner, but a predator who allowed himself to be chained for his own amusement. Some believed he was testing them. Others believed he was waiting for the right moment to strike. The effect was the same. Fear spread not from their machines, but from the human himself. Their empire had relied on fear as its strongest weapon, yet now it was their own soldiers who could not sleep, who flinched at shadows, who dreaded the sound of laughter in the halls. Commander Vaynar confronted Daniel directly in his cell, demanding to know why he stayed. Daniel leaned against the wall, his voice calm and steady. "Because you think you are in control, but every hour I sit here, your power dies a little more. You cannot break me, and the fact that you cannot is breaking you." The words struck Vaynar harder than any blade, for he saw the truth. His crew no longer feared his authority. They feared the human who seemed untouchable. From that moment, Daniel no longer needed to resist. His mere presence became the weapon. The guards avoided eye contact. The scientists argued in panic, and Vaynar himself began to doubt his place in the Dominion. The slip of control was complete. The Dominion ship was no longer holding a prisoner. Instead, it was holding a legend, and that legend was slowly unraveling everything they had built in the darkness of his cell. Daniel smiled once again. He had not only survived, he had turned their most dreaded chamber into his stage. He had shown them that pain was nothing compared to human will, and he knew the longer he remained, the more the story would spread, until even the stars themselves whispered of the human who laughed at torture. The turning point. The story of Daniel Creed spread far beyond the walls of the Dominion warship. At first it was whispers among the guards, then murmurs in the corridors of nearby fleets, and finally rumors that traveled across the Empire itself. The tale was simple. A single human had been taken alive. He was subjected to every known torture, every device, every illusion, and yet he laughed, he mocked the Dominion's most feared weapons, and he bent their restraints with his bare hands, but chose not to escape. The more the story spread, the less it sounded like rumor, and the more it became a warning. Other species under Dominion rule listened. Carefully, many of them had lived for centuries in fear, believing the Dominion to be untouchable. But if one human could endure their worst and treat it as a game, what could an army of humans do? Whispers turned into questions, and questions turned into sparks of rebellion. Small groups in far-off colonies began to believe that the Dominion's reign of terror was not eternal. The fear that had kept them in chains began to weaken, because one man's laughter had reached their ears. On the warship, the crew grew restless. Some refused to serve in the torture chamber. Others begged to be transferred to different posts far away from the human commander. Vanar found his authority rotting away. His orders were obeyed slower. His presence no longer silenced the whispers. Even his most loyal officers questioned whether keeping the human aboard was wise. They feared him not for his strength, but for his defiance. For every hour he remained unbroken was another hour. Their empire lost its reputation. Daniel understood this. He knew he was winning a war without firing a weapon. Every smirk, every calm word was another crack in the Dominion's armor. When guards brought food, he asked them about their people, their homes. He spoke of freedom and of a galaxy, without fear. Some guards laughed nervously at his words, but later repeated them in secret to others. The infection of doubt spread wider than the commanders could contain. Vanar tried to regain control by staging a public display. He gathered the crew into the main chamber and ordered Daniel to be brought before them, broken and humiliated. But when Daniel walked into the hall, chained and scarred, yet standing tall, the crowd did not see weakness. They saw resilience. They saw a human who had faced all their nightmares and smiled at them. Daniel looked across the sea of alien faces and said loudly, "You think I am your prisoner, but look at yourselves. You are the ones trapped by fear. And now you know fear of me too." The silence that followed was heavy and unshakable. No amount of threats from Vanar could erase the power of those words. Outside the warship, other fleets began to hear rumors that soldiers aboard had refused to obey commands. Some said entire crews were demanding the human be released. Some said the Dominion Council itself was panicking because their greatest weapon, fear, was slipping from their grasp. If one ship could be shaken by a single man, then entire fleets might soon crumble. Daniel had become more than a soldier. He had become a symbol. The turning point came when an allied species long enslaved by the Dominion intercepted the transmission of his defiant speech. They spread it across their networks, carrying it to every hidden corner of the galaxy. The story became legend before the Dominion could suppress it. Daniel Creed, the human who laughed at torture, the man who broke the Dominion without raising a weapon, commander. Vanar realized too late that the human had achieved more in captivity than any fleet had in open war. The Dominion had always believed fear made them strong, but Daniel had revealed the truth. Fear made them fragile. It chained them tighter than any prisoner's bonds, and now those chains were breaking. The Empire trembled not because of weapons or fleets, but because of a smile and a laugh that refused to die. In his cell, Daniel leaned back against the wall and listened to the distant murmurs of guards arguing. His body was bruised, his skin scarred, but his spirit blazed. Brighter than ever, he whispered to himself that the real fight was already won, because the Dominion no longer commanded fear. They were drowning in it themselves, and once that truth spread across the stars, their reign would collapse. The humans, freedom. The Dominion ship drifted in uneasy silence. Its crew no longer carried themselves with the proud arrogance that once defined the Empire. Instead, they moved with hesitation, eyes darting to the cell that held Daniel Creed, as if his presence had grown larger than the walls that confined him. The rumors had spread too far to be stopped. Every guard, every officer, every scientist whispered that the human could not be broken. Some believed he was immortal. Others believed he was waiting for the right moment to strike. The truth mattered less than the fear, and the fear was destroying them faster than any fleet ever could. Commander Vanar sat in his private chamber, staring at reports from across the Empire. Entire colonies were refusing. Tribute fleets were delayed by mutiny. Species once silent now spoke of rebellion. All of it sparked by the legend of one man. Vanar clenched his claws in frustration. He had wanted to humiliate humanity, but instead, he had built a symbol that threatened the Dominion itself. He realized then that keeping the human captive was no longer a triumph, but a curse. Every hour Daniel remained alive. The Empire's grip slipped further. Daniel knew it as well. In his cell, he waited patiently, never rushing, never showing despair. He treated each day as if it were another move in a long game. He spoke to guards with casual words that lingered in their minds. He reminded them of their weakness, of their chains, of the truth they had always known but never dared to admit. He did not need to escape. The Dominion was already collapsing around him. The final breaking point came when the ship docked at a Dominion outpost. The Council had demanded Daniel be brought before them to be displayed as a lesson to the galaxy. But the moment he was marched through the corridors of the outpost, something strange happened. The soldiers lining the halls stepped back. Instead of jeering, the officers looked at him not with contempt but with dread. And when Daniel smiled and raised his scarred hands in a mock wave, the silence that followed was louder than any roar. The Dominion Council saw it too, and fear gripped them, because their power had always been built on spectacle, and now the spectacle had turned against them. During the assembly, Daniel was placed on a platform, his chains rattling, as Vanar announced to the council that the human would be broken before their eyes. Yet Daniel simply straightened his back and spoke over him. His voice carried through the chamber, strong and clear. You think you are masters because you hold the whip. But look at yourselves. You are slaves to fear, and I have shown you what happens when fear has no power. You cannot break me, you cannot break my people. And the more you try, the more you reveal your own weakness. The council erupted in chaos. Some shouted for his execution, others demanded silence. But the words were already spreading through the broadcast systems across the outpost. The message traveled faster than the sensors could cut it. Daniel's defiance reached the ears of thousands, then millions, and within days it would reach billions. Species long oppressed by the Dominion saw his calm, unbroken figure and realized the Empire was nothing more than a shadow built on terror. In the confusion of the assembly, Daniel moved with sudden precision. His chains snapped with ease, and the guards who once would have rushed him hesitated, frozen by the legend that had grown around him. He walked calmly down the steps as the chamber erupted in panic. No one stopped him because no one truly believed they could. He passed through the corridors and out into the docking bay, where ships stood ready. Some guards lowered their weapons not out of loyalty but out of fear that firing on him would confirm the stories that he could not be killed. Daniel stepped aboard a captured vessel, and with a final glance at the trembling outpost, he smiled one last time before the ship launched into the stars. The news spread faster than the Dominion could contain it. The human had walked free. The council had been humiliated. Entire fleets began to fracture. Entire colonies rose in rebellion. What no war had achieved. In centuries, one man had begun with laughter in a torture chamber. The Dominion's empire trembled on the edge of collapse, and the legend of Daniel Creed became the spark of freedom for countless worlds. Far away on the small ship, Daniel finally allowed himself a moment of quiet. He leaned back in the pilot's chair, scars aching but spirit unbroken. He thought of Earth, of his comrades, and of the wars still to come. He knew the fight against the Dominion was far from over, but he also knew the tide had turned. The galaxy now understood the truth. Humans were not prey to be broken. They were predators who turned torture into a game and fear into a weapon, stronger than any fleet. And as the stars stretched out before him, Daniel Creed smiled, knowing that his laughter had become the sound that would end an empire. The human walks free. The Dominion had believed themselves invincible, but their warship had become the birthplace of their downfall. From the moment they captured Daniel Creed, they thought they had seized a prize to parade before the galaxy. Yet every lash, every device, every illusion had turned against them. For instead of breaking, the human had laughed, and his laughter had spread like wildfire through the halls and into the hearts of all who heard it. Whispers became rumors, and rumors became legend. Entire fleets began to doubt their purpose. Colonies under Dominion rule questioned why they had obeyed for so long. Fear had been the Empire's strongest chain, and now that chain was crumbling. A single human had shown them what it meant to defy terror. Daniel sat in his cell, waiting with patience, his body scarred, but his spirit untouched. He spoke to the guards like old friends, asking them about their lives and planting seeds of doubt in their minds. Every word became heavier than any blade. When the council finally demanded he be displayed at an outpost, before the eyes of their leaders, the moment that was meant to restore their power instead destroyed it. Daniel was marched before them in chains, yet he walked like a man in control. The crowd expected a broken creature, but they saw a soldier standing tall, with a smile carved into his scarred face. The silence was so deep that even the council shifted uncomfortably. Daniel raised his voice, and his words echoed through the chamber. "You are slaves to your own fear. You have no power over me or my people. The more you try, the more you reveal your weakness. Humanity will never bow, and neither will those who see the truth." The message could not be silenced. Broadcasts carried his words beyond the outpost to the fleets, to the colonies, and into the hands of those long oppressed. The guards who stood beside him hesitated when he moved, and with a single flex of his arms the chains shattered. He did not run. He walked calmly through the corridors while soldiers lowered their weapons, not out of mercy, but because they no longer believed they could stop him. The outpost fell into chaos as Daniel stepped aboard a vessel and left the Dominion behind. Across the stars the story spread: the human who laughed at torture, the prisoner who walked free, the predator who turned the Dominion's greatest weapon into their greatest weakness. Entire worlds rose in rebellion. Entire fleets abandoned their posts. The empire that had stood for centuries began to collapse, not under firepower but under the weight of its own fear. Daniel Creed had become more than a soldier. He was a legend on the small vessel that carried him into open space. Daniel leaned back and looked out at the endless stars. His body was weary, but his spirit burned stronger than ever. He thought of Earth and the comrades waiting for him. He thought of the battles yet to come. He knew the war was not over, but he also knew the tide had turned. The galaxy had seen that humanity could not be broken, and that truth would live forever. He closed his eyes for a moment and smiled. His laughter had already brought down an empire, and his fight was only beginning. The end.